Hello my dear students, I am Pratibha Deya from the English Lux and today we will discuss a chapter for students of class 10th first flight book, chapter number 2, Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom, written by Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. In this chapter we will discuss introduction, characters and autobiography of Nelson Mandela. Outline of our video is author and title, introduction, characters, the autobiography, conclusion. Let's start. Have you heard of Nelson Mandela and his African National Congress spent a lifetime fighting against apartheid? Do you know? Let's read about the Nelson Mandela, the author of this chapter. He is one of the great moral and political leader of our time, an international hero whose lifelong dedication to the fight against racial oppression in South Africa won him the Nobel Peace Prize and presidency of his country. He was sworn in as the country's first black president. Mandela is remembered for the great work he did for the emancipation of the colored people in South Africa. He can be termed as the Gandhi of South Africa. He won the Nobel Prize in 1993. In this lesson, Nelson Mandela counts the surprisingly eventful 27 years in prison and the complex, delicate negotiations that led both to his freedom and to the beginning of the end of the apartheid. Finally, he provides the ultimate inside account. The name of our chapter is Long Walk to Freedom. Is this suitable title or not? Let's read. Long Walk to Freedom is an autobiography written by South African President Nelson Mandela and was first published in 1994 by Little Brown and Company. The book profiles his early life, coming of age, education, and 27 years in prison. Under the apartheid government, Mandela was regarded as a terrorist and jailed on the infamous Robben Island for his role as a leader of the then outlawed ANC. He later achieved international recognition for his leadership as president in rebuilding the country's once segregated society. The last chapter of the book describes his political assassination and his belief that the struggle still continued against apartheid in South Africa. Mandela dedicated his book to his 6 children, 21 grandchildren, and 3 great grandchildren, and to all his comrades, friends, and fellow South Africans whom he served and whose courage, determination, and patriotism remain his source of inspiration. This chapter is the extract from the Long Walk to Freedom book. It includes the description of the inauguration ceremony and citations from his speech and about his journey to being a freedom fighter. Nelson Mandela, A Long Walk to Freedom is an excerpt from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, who was the first black president of South Africa. In those times, white-skinned people were the rulers of the society and life was hell for the blacks. Many people struggled for their rights and Mandela called citizens the basic asset of any country. Freedom from racism is the central theme of the lesson. Students, now pay your attention please. Now I'm going to tell you about the introduction of this chapter. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, born 18 July 1918, the first black president of South Africa. Excerpt from Long Walk to Freedom include description of the inauguration ceremony, citations from his speech, his journey to being a freedom fighter, The struggle, along with a tribute to other freedom fighters and countless other people who fought for their freedom. In South Africa, a brutal practice named apartheid was followed. Apartheid refers to the discrimination between people on the basis of their race. It was one of the most brutal societies where dark-skinned people were deprived of their basic rights. This lesson gives us an overview as to how Nelson Mandela, along with others, carved their way to a society where there will be no discrimination on the basis of their color, caste, race, age, and gender. Main character is Nelson Mandela because he himself written this autobiography, and others comrades, freedom fighters, his family. Now I'm going to tell you something about Nelson Mandela, the great man he was. The most prominent characteristic of Nelson Mandela are strength of spirit, integrity, honor, and leadership. Mandela's strength of spirit allowed him to endure 27 years of imprisonment. He never compromised his beliefs, which shows integrity and a willingness never to give up the fight. Nelson Mandela demonstrated remarkable leadership qualities. He was a man of peace. He had a powerful presence and disarmed enemies with his smile. He showed the world what forgiveness looks like. He was positive, thinking about what could be. He was a visionary and could see the big picture. Apartheid was a system of racial inequality which kept all races separate from one another. In 1994, Mandela was of key importance in negotiating the freedom and equality of all South Africans. He then became South Africa's first democratically elected president. He was a man of uncommon courage, wisdom, and generosity. He regards the death of thousands of people who sacrificed their lives for the cause of courage. It is not the absence of fear, but the victory over it. No man is born with harassment, rather love, which comes natural to the human heart. Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa after more than 3 centuries of white rule, celebrated very vividly the grand ceremony of the first democratic non-racial. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa. It begins with the description of their inaugural ceremony, which took place on the 10th of May 1994, where the entire nation, along with many international leaders, accept the victory of a newly and fairly elected government. It involved speeches by the president and the two deputy presidents, followed by an impressive air show of fighter jets and helicopters. Long ago, in the first decade of the 20th century, white supremacy introduced the system of apartheid and made life a living hell for the dark-skinned population. It gave rise to one of the most inhuman societies of the world. Many people have struggled and sacrificed their basic human rights. The author expressed his desire to thank all those freedom fighters who couldn't live to see this autumn day. He referred to the citizens as the greatest asset of the country. It is these people he gathered his courage from. Mandela believes that courageous is not the man who is fearless, but the man who has overcome fear. He also mentioned the two responsibilities every human has and how he, in order to fulfill his obligations towards the society, his obligations towards his family was neglected. He became a man of people when he realized that the idea of freedom was an illusion for him and people like him. It was then he joined the African National Congress and fought for his rights till he became the first black president of the nation. This lesson pays tribute to those black heroes and patriots who waged a relentless struggle against the apartheid of South Africa. The first non-racial government was held at the lovely amphitheatre in the Union Building in Pretoria. It was the South African soil. Politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries attended the ceremony. First of all, Mr. De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first deputy president. Then came Mandela's turn. He was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. Mandela spoke how for decades South Africa was the seat of white supremacy. Now the presence of all people confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. The blacks, who were considered as outlaws not so long ago, were hosting the nations of the world on their soil. The victory over apartheid was a common victory for justice, peace, and human dignity. Political freedom had been won. Now they would work hard to liberate all their people from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, and disease. Then there was a spectacular display of jets. South African jets and helicopters roared in perfect formation over them in the sky. It was also a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy and to the new government. Then two national anthems were played. Nelson Mandela was overwhelmed with a sense of history. A few years after the Anglo-Boer War, apartheid was introduced in South Africa. The society based on racial discrimination was the harshest and most inhuman society in the world. Now a new system based on the equality of all men regardless of their color and race has displayed the old and cruel system. Apartheid is a political system that separates people according to their race. Apartheid created a deep and lasting wounds in the people. The decades of exploitation and oppression of the black produced heroes like Tambos, Sisless, and others. These black heroes were men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. The greatest wealth of South Africa was not in its minerals and diamonds but in men of such great characters. Nelson Mandela learned the meaning of courage from such brave comrades. Courage is the victory over fear. These comrades were ready to risk and sacrifice their lives for an idea, the idea of freedom and equality. Even in the darkest prison, their hopes and faith were not broken. They never allowed the flame of struggle to be extinguished. Nelson Mandela thought that every man has twin obligation. He has a duty towards his wife and children and an obligation to his people and country. In South Africa, it was impossible for blacks like him to fulfill both those obligations. If any black tried to live like a free human being, he was punished and isolated. He was forced to live an isolated life away from his life. He was forced to live a life of rebellion and secrecy. Joining the African National Congress, Mandela realized that not only was he deprived of freedom, but his brothers and sisters were also deprived of freedom. That's why he joined the African National Congress, which we can call as ANC. It was his desire for the freedom of his people and their self-respect that totally transformed him from weak young man to a bold one. A law, abiding lawyer was forced to become an outlaw. He knew the oppressed must be liberated. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. Both of them must be liberated. He realized that freedom is indivisible. Conclusion. Moral of the lesson is people who believe in freedom cannot rest. Nelson Mandela tells us that courage is not the absence of fear but triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela thinks love is natural. He gives the message of importance and value of freedom. Any race that is deprived of freedom raises its voice against oppressor and fights till they achieve freedom. I hope you understood the whole chapter very well. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it will be useful to you. Make sure if you have any suggestion and comments, feel free to write in the comment section, and for more videos, like and subscribe my channel The English Lux, your key to English, and don't forget to hit the bell icon.